Welcome back. We're still with Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, the Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Extractive Industries and Transparency Initiative. Thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you, Gloria.
Well, we left off with examining the report, and we know the other agencies, apart from 9 states that came under audit. What exactly were your observations there?
Well, the audit, like I said earlier on, is called the Fiscal, Allocation and Statutory Disbursement Audit, and it covered a period of 5 years, 2007 to 2011. There are 2 major revenue streams that go into the Federation account. There's a mineral revenue and there's a non-mineral revenue. The total funds that went into the account during these 5 years was 30.09 trillion naira, out of which 23.7 trillion is contributed by mineral revenue. That's specifically by oil and gas revenue, less JV cash calls and deductions that NNPC makes for fuel subsidy. The non-mineral revenue, on the other hand, was 4 trillion naira, and there is also 2.3 trillion that is for VAT. Out of this revenues, 8.5 trillion was transferred to the excess crude account, and the highest transfers was in 2011, which was 3.5, and the lowest was 339 million in 2009. The distribution of these funds to the various tiers of government, the report shows that 22.35 trillion was distributed to the states, the federal government, the state, and other beneficiaries of 13% derivation. NDDC received 7.4 billion for completion of projects during this period.
Even though some of those projects can't be identified.
But most of the projects are very difficult to identify. And we also noticed that the monitoring of these projects was very, very poorly done. And the NDC Act, we found, is silent on how the budgets of the oil-producing companies are obtained by NDC. Remember that the Act makes a provision that NNDC is entitled to 3% of the budgets of the annual budgets of each oil-producing company. Is silent on how that is to be obtained. So NDDC is not able to tell whether what it receives is what it is supposed to receive from the companies, because they don't have the budgets to compare that. Earlier on, we discussed about subsidy payments. PPPRA is responsible for management of subsidies in the country. During part of the audit period, PPPRA 2007-2008 was paying subsidies, but at some point a change was made in the arrangement, and the DMO, Debt Management Office, took over the payment of subsidies. The audit also noted, like other audits, that NNPC deducts its own subsidy claim at source before paying to the Federation, which means it's not drawing its own subsidy claims through the PSF, the Petroleum Support Fund.
And that's huge.
Yes, it is. It is very, very significant because it should be subjected to the same rules that other marketers are subjected to, and that is something that has been going on for a very long time. It needs to be corrected. Otherwise, from the first NEITI audits, this has been reported. It's continuously reported in every audit. If we're not changing it, then we should amend the regulation to make it proper and legal for NNPC to do the deductions the way it is doing them. There is a fund that is called the Natural Resource Development Fund. It is supposed to be a fund that will provide development of alternative sources of revenue to oil and gas. And this fund, over this 5-year period, received 365 billion naira. But contrary to the objectives of the fund, government has been using this fund to borrow for obligations like meeting budget deficits, purchase of fertilizers, improvement in agriculture. And there is an outstanding debt from these borrowings to that fund of 339 billion to date from the federal government to the Natural Resource Development Fund. NDDC during this reporting period received 596 billion naira, and out of which is spent 459 billion on various recurrent and capital projects. There is an outstanding contribution by the federal government to the NDDC in the sum of 463 billion that has not yet been released to the NDDC, according to the provisions of the Act. We also said in the report that there are these duplicator projects that need to be addressed, and the way to address it will be for the NDDC headquarters to reconcile its project schedules with the host communities, because you see the same project featuring in both the NDDC and the host communities. And also, apart from the reconciliation, the government should cause a value for money audit to be conducted to make sure that these projects are actually delivering value to the communities for which they are intended.
Meaning that sometimes one party might be handling that project, the other party might not just be handling it, or they're not delivering, what they're supposed to deliver.
Well, if you find one agency listing a project with the same value and another agency listing at the same value, then there is a problem somewhere in between. That is
and that's what you found out in many of these projects.
That's why we call them duplications.
And is that what you found out
yes,
in many of the projects?
No, in the NDDC projects.
Okay.
Specifically in the NDDC projects, because they have this arrangement where they're delivering projects for host communities, for the 9 states that host them. So this reconciliation is vital. It is important to do. It is only when those detailed reconciliations are done that a determination of what actually went very wrong can be made. And also the value for money audit is also very, very important. It needs to be done as quickly as possible. The Ecological Fund, on the other hand, is a fund that receives the federal government's share of the derivation from the oil and gas revenue. And it received during this period 164 billion naira, while the excess crude account contributed 53 billion to this same fund. The audit also showed that NEMA, that is supposed to benefit from the Ecological Fund, is being owed 19 billion to date, out of the 43 billion that is due to the agency. And also for this fund, the project that it executes, of the 139 projects, only 36 have been completed. The rest are ongoing or simply not completed. So there is a need also to audit this fund, do a more detailed audit, and check the status of each of these pending projects.
We also have we have TED Fund.
The Tertiary Education Fund, during the course of the audit, we found they received significant amount of revenues. And at the end of the reporting period, 202 billion is sitting unutilized in the accounts of TED Fund. What the audit observed is that the tertiary institutions that are supposed to be using this fund are not able to access it, whether they simply don't know how to do it, or the regulations are such that they cannot meet the requirements. But there are funds that are lying idle that could be used to improve our tertiary institutions. So what the audit recommends is that the TED Fund itself should engage these tertiary institutions and educate them on how to access the funds, and give them assistance to be able to access the funds, so that the universities can have the much needed development that is so desirable.
Really, NEITI is supposed to provide these information, this audit, just really to help the government, make the government accountable and companies accountable. But that is really not happening.
It's not happening the way we hope it will happen. The remediation process has been very, very slow. And as a result, when the current NEITI board was put in place, the board, after checking all that NEITI has done in the past, determined that its most important work will be achieving effective remediation. And we approached Mr. President and suggested to Mr. President that there will be a need to reconstitute the IMTT to make it more effective, to have more senior